What I'm arguing, Tony, is that as an extrovert, I need to act like an introvert, and an introvert on occasion as a leader would have to act like an extrovert. Now, ambiverts do this naturally. I've got to do it and take care. For example, David Benson runs Aldo. He's the son of David, the son of rather Aldo. He's 6'7". He's big. He's not overweight. He's just a large man. He's CEO. So we recognize if he goes to a conference room to discuss strategy and he tells people what's on his mind, it's going to tend to a quiet conversation. People go, that's why you're the CEO. I love it. So David would, though he's an extrovert, would not tell them what is on his mind because he knows what's on his mind. What he wants to know is on what are other people's minds. And so he pulls back from, being the natural extrovert and listens as a good introvert would and gets other people's opinion. Because at the end, what's in his mind in terms of strategy has evolved from the conversation around the table, and they'll come to a better strategy. Now, happy thought, he's still CEO, so he gets to decide the strategy, but it's improved because he acted like an introvert and really listened well and connected the dots to what people were saying. So he's got to show introverted behavior to be effective. On the other hand, Claude Mongeau used to run CN, 24,000 people. And he was the first CEO that I talked to that I asked the question. And Claude said, I'm a big introvert. And it's something where Claude had to act like an extrovert if he wanted to be CEO. Right. So he was COO for a number of years. And he got a coach that gave him a clicker like someone let you in a bar would. And it's been such a long pandemic, I can't remember what they call him, a bouncer. Tony, that's what they call him. And he had to click 5 times a day and act like an extrovert in order to grow into that role. So, for example, you get in the elevator in the morning, and instead of looking at his shoes and saving us a couple $100,000, he'd go, good morning, Tony. He recognizes you, says your name, and says something like, hey, it's cold out there, something you're not going to argue with in Montreal in the winter. And then, Tony, I love what you presented to the board last week. That was really helpful. Get off the elevator. Because we expect a CEO to act like that, to remember my name, to recognize what I've done, and say something positive towards me. That's good senior leader behavior. So as an introvert, he had to do something which was a bit unnatural, right, but he recognized the value of doing it.
The reason I'm smiling is because I actually made it a New Year's resolution, I think it was in 2018 or somewhere in there, to actually go in random elevators and strike up conversations with people, which sometimes worked. Sometimes people looked at me rather oddly, I must say. But
so are you more of an introvert or an extrovert, Tony, just to get personal for a moment?
Yeah, I would say I'm more of an introvert in the sense that I don't mind my own company. I don't mind switching off. But I had to, in politics, be an extrovert. When you're knocking on doors of strangers and asking for their vote, that's a fairly extreme form of extroversion. So again, in order to survive in my milieu, I had to switch things on. But I remember, like, when we were going to party conferences or things like that, my staff knew that I had a set amount of people that I could talk to, and when I reached that point, they had to usher me out of the hall because I'd start to be annoyed and want to be alone with myself a little bit. So that's kind of how I self-analyze. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I interviewed Justin Trudeau, who I know when he just graduated from McGill when I came here, so I did a few things with him. I wish I'd known he'd be prime minister. I would have been friendlier, but anyway, he's a great guy. And he told me he was an introvert. And when I interviewed him for my radio show, and I actually rolled my eyes, I think. I knew him well enough, and I was genuinely surprised. But he said he's genuinely an introvert, but he understood if he wanted to be in politics and become potentially prime minister, which he did. I mean, his dad was the prime minister. He's someone who knew what he was getting into. Now, he's going to make the world a better place and so on, but he had to act a certain role, and he knew what that role was. He took it on willingly, but he still needs those introvert breaks to recharge like you do. Now, there's an interesting thing because I read about introvert breaks, but there was nothing about extrovert breaks. And I said, well, that's unfair. How come they get breaks when we don't? So I wrote an article for the Warden Leadership Digest arguing there's 5 types of extrovert breaks that I take. And it really resonated a lot of people, well, with extroverts anyway, because they said, yeah, I take those breaks. So, for example, when I go to a restaurant in
Karl,
another city...
we're going to take another break. Talking about breaks, we have to take one right now.